The Rhinar Empire was once a powerful force in the galaxy. Its queen, Vixilia, had led her people through countless wars, expanding their territory and building an empire feared by all. The Rhinar were known for their unmatched warriors, advanced technology, and a culture built on strength and honor. But now, the empire was on the edge of destruction. The war had dragged on for years. What started as a small rebellion grew into a massive war, with multiple alien species uniting to bring down the Rhinar. Each battle chipped away at their power, leaving the once proud empire struggling to hold onto its territory. Cities fell, resources dwindled, and the Rhinar people began to lose hope. Queen Vixilia stood at the heart of the royal palace, looking out at the vast landscape of her homeworld. The night was quiet, but she could feel the tension in the air. The enemy was closing in, their fleets advancing towards the capital. The Rhinar forces were exhausted, and their morale was at an all-time low. Her advisors were in the war room, discussing their next move, but Vixilia couldn't focus on their plans. She knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy launched their final assault. Her best generals had already warned her that the war could not be won without drastic action. Yet, she felt trapped, unable to find a solution. Her thoughts drifted to the humans, the Earthlings who had once helped her in a small skirmish against a rogue faction of the Rhinar years ago. The humans had proven themselves to be skilled in combat and strategy, far more capable than any of the other species she had encountered. Vixilia had always considered them an interesting species, unpredictable but powerful in their own right. But relying on humans was risky. They were outsiders, and the Rhinar had never trusted anyone but themselves. It had taken years to earn the respect of her own people. The thought of bringing humans into the war felt like a betrayal to her own empire. Yet, with every passing day, it became more clear that her people could not win alone. Vixilia sat at her desk, her fingers running across the smooth surface of an ancient Rhinar artifact. She had studied the artifact for years, knowing that it held deep meaning for her people. It was a symbol of strength, of unity, something her empire desperately needed now. Her mind raced. She had to make a decision. If she didn't act soon, everything she had fought for would be lost. She needed help. She needed the humans. With a heavy heart, Vixilia made her choice. She would send a call to her human allies, asking for their assistance once more. It was the only chance to turn the tide of the war. But as she drafted the message, she wondered if the humans would even respond. After all, they had their own wars to fight, their own problems. Why would they risk their lives for the Rhinar Empire? But she had no other option. The message was sent, and now all she could do was wait. The fate of the Rhinar Empire rested in the hands of her human allies. Captain Damian Harris had seen a lot in his years of service. He had led soldiers in fierce battles and faced enemies far stronger than he had ever imagined. But even he could never forget the first time he met the alien queen, Vixilia. It had been a strange alliance, one born of necessity, but over time, it had proven to be a strong one. Damien sat in his office, going through reports when his communication device beeped. It was a secure message, marked as urgent. He raised an eyebrow as he opened it. The message was from the Queen of the Rhinar herself. The message was short but clear. The Rhinar Empire is on the brink of collapse. We need your help. You are our last hope. Come to the Rhinar homeworld immediately. Queen Vixilia. Damien sat back in his chair, stunned. He had heard rumors about the Rhinar's troubles, but he never thought it would come to this. The Queen, once a fierce leader who ruled with strength and fear, was now asking for help. He had always respected her, but she had always been so proud, so independent. To admit defeat and call on humanity's help meant the situation was desperate. He thought about his team, a group of elite fighters who had worked with him on countless missions. They were the best of the best, trained to handle any situation. If anyone could help the Rhinar, it was them. Damien stood up, pacing back and forth. He knew what needed to be done. The humans had always fought for their own survival, but this was different. This was more than just one species fight. It was a chance to prove that the humans were more than just survivors. They could be the ones to turn the tide in this war. He opened a secure line and called his team. "Everyone, we have a mission," he said. "The Renar need us. Pack up and get ready. We're heading to their homeworld." Sarah Cortez, a former soldier and one of Damien's closest allies, was the first to respond. She was always ready for action. "Do they even deserve our help?" she asked. "The Renar have caused a lot of suffering." Damien understood her anger. The Renar had been ruthless in the past, but something had changed. The Queen's message showed vulnerability, something he had never seen before. It wasn't just about saving them. It was about ensuring peace and stopping a greater threat from conquering the galaxy. "I know what you're thinking," Damien said, "but this is bigger than our past differences. The Reinar's enemies are ruthless, and if they fall, everyone will be at risk. We're not doing this for them, Sarah. We're doing this to protect everyone." Sarah paused, then sighed. "All right, I'm in. Let's do this." With his team on board, Damien began preparing for the mission. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. The Reinar were proud, and their queen's call for help was a sign of how dire the situation was. But he also knew this was a turning point, not just for the Reinar, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. As the team gathered their equipment and prepared for their journey, Damien couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The fate of the galaxy was hanging in the balance, and their arrival on the Reinar homeworld might be the only thing standing between the Empire and total destruction. On Earth, the call to arms had been sent. Damien Harris's team, a group of Earth's most skilled soldiers, warriors, and tacticians, gathered in a secure facility. They had faced countless challenges in their past missions, but this one was unlike any other. The Reinar Empire was at war, and the fate of an entire species, and possibly the galaxy, rested on their shoulders. Sarah Cortez, a former soldier with unmatched combat skills, paced back and forth in the briefing room. Her mind was racing with thoughts. The Reinar were known for their strength, but they had also been ruthless. Their history wasn't one of kindness. And now, the Queen, who had once seen humans as nothing more than tools, was asking for help. Sarah couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Are we really doing this?" she asked aloud to Damien, who was sitting at the table, reviewing the mission details. Damien looked up, his expression serious. "We don't have a choice. The Reinar need us, and if we don't act now, they'll fall. If they fall, the rest of us might be next." Sarah stopped pacing and looked at him. She had seen Damien face down enemies before with nothing but determination in his eyes, but there was something different about the way he spoke now. This wasn't just another mission. This was something bigger. Sarah had always trusted Damien's judgment. She knew he had never led them wrong. She thought back to their past missions, the times they fought side by side, when victory felt impossible, yet they always found a way. She trusted that they could find a way here too. "I'll follow you to the end," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I still don't trust the Reinar. They've hurt too many people. Why now? Why ask for our help?" Damien leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "I get it. The Reinar haven't exactly been the best neighbors. But something's different this time. Vixelia's not the same as she was before. She knows she's losing, and she's asking for help. We're not doing this for them. We're doing it for us. If they fall, everything we've worked for could be lost." Sarah gave a reluctant nod, her fingers tightening around the handle of her rifle. "I'll do what needs to be done." The rest of the team, a mix of seasoned fighters, tech experts, and strategists, gathered around the table. There was no question about it. They were all in. This wasn't just another mission. This was a chance to change the course of history, to protect the galaxy from a threat that none of them fully understood. Captain Harris stood and addressed his team. "We all know what's at stake. The Reinar might not be perfect, but if we don't help them, we'll all suffer. We need to be ready for anything. This won't be easy. The enemy is powerful, and we're walking into the heart of their empire. But we're humans, and we faced impossible odds before. We can do this." His team nodded, ready to go. They knew that each of them would play a critical role. Whether it was in battle, tactics, or tech, they were all indispensable. And together, they would make their way to the Rhinar homeworld to help their alien allies. As the final preparations were made, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. What they would face on the Rhinar homeworld would change everything. But there was no turning back now. The team was ready, and the galaxy would soon know just how strong the humans truly were. The journey to the Rhinar homeworld had been long and tense. The human ship, the Resolute, cut through space at incredible speeds, its sleek design slicing through the dark void of the galaxy. Inside, Damien Harris and his team sat in silence, preparing for what awaited them. The crew's energy was a mix of excitement and uncertainty. No one really knew what to expect once they arrived. The Rhinar were powerful, but their pride and reputation for being unforgiving made the situation even more delicate. Damien stood at the helm of the ship, staring out at the stars. The sight of distant planets passing by didn't ease his mind. In fact, the closer they got to the Rhinar homeworld, the more his thoughts turned to the unknown. They were about to enter a war-torn empire, and though they had an alliance with Vixelia, there was still much that remained unclear. "We're entering Rhinar space," a voice called out from the comms panel. Damien straightened. "Understood. Prepare for landing. Let's make this as smooth as possible." Sarah walked over to him, her expression hard as ever. "You think they'll really trust us, after everything they've done?" Damien turned to face her. "We don't have a choice. They need us. Vixelia wouldn't ask for help if there were any other options left." Sarah nodded, though her skepticism remained. "Just keep your eyes open. The Rhinar don't forget easily." The ship's engines hummed as the Resolute broke through the planet's atmosphere. Below, the Rhinar homeworld was a harsh, battle-scarred landscape. Cities still stood, but many had been reduced to rubble. The signs of a long, exhausting war were evident everywhere. Fires burned in the distance, and the sky was heavy with smoke. It was a far cry from the stories of grandeur Damien had heard about the once mighty Rhinar Empire. As they descended toward the landing site, a group of Rhinar soldiers appeared, waiting for their arrival. Damien couldn't help but notice how cold and distant they seemed, their eyes filled with suspicion as the human team exited the ship. Queen Vixelia herself stood before them, flanked by her most trusted generals. She was still the commanding figure she had always been, her regal presence unchanged by the devastation surrounding them. Her silver armor shimmered in the pale light, and her sharp features were set in a stern expression. "Captain Harris," Vixelia's voice rang out, strong and clear. "I trust you have brought your best." Damien stepped forward and bowed his head slightly in respect. "We're here to help, Queen Vixelia, whatever it takes." The Queen regarded him for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning his team. There was a flicker of something, perhaps doubt, in her gaze, but she quickly hid it behind her stoic expression. "I hope so, human. You are not here out of charity, but out of necessity. The Rhinar Empire is on the brink of collapse. We have little time left." Damien nodded. "We understand. We're ready to fight." The tension in the air was thick. The humans and Rhinar stood face to face, the uneasy alliance clear to both sides. The humans were still viewed as outsiders, and the Rhinar soldiers weren't exactly welcoming. But Damien had a job to do. They all did. Vixelia turned and began walking toward the nearby command center. "Follow me. I'll show you where you'll be needed most." As they walked through the war-torn palace, Damien felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just a battle for the Rhinar. It was a battle for survival, for the future of the galaxy. The humans were about to prove that, despite their differences, they could be the turning point in the Rhinar War. But Damien couldn't shake the feeling that this would be no ordinary fight. The true test of their alliance was only just beginning. The Rhinar homeworld was a place of power and pride, but now it was a shadow of its former self. The streets of the capital were lined with soldiers, many of them looking worn and tired, their faces set in grim determination. The war had taken a toll on everyone. The Rhinar, the humans, and even the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of endless conflict. Damian Harris and his team had been assigned to train with the Rhinar forces. It wasn't just a matter of fighting together. They needed to learn each other's strategies and methods if they were going to stand a chance against the invading forces. The humans had their own way of war, one that was often more creative and less predictable than the rigid traditional tactics of the Rhinar. Sarah Cortez, always ready for a fight, was assigned to work directly with the Rhinar elite warriors. These soldiers, some of the fiercest in the galaxy, were skeptical of the human methods. They didn't trust the humans, not after everything they had heard about Earth. The Rhinar had never seen humans as equals. They were simply tools for war, disposable mercenaries. Sarah walked into the training hall, her boots echoing on the cold stone floor. The Rhinar warriors were lined up, their weapons gleaming in the harsh light. They stood tall, their eyes narrow with distrust as she entered. One of the Rhinar warriors, a tall figure with dark red scales and fierce yellow eyes, stepped forward. "You think your human tricks will save us?" he sneered. "We fight with honor, not with tricks." Sarah didn't flinch. She had dealt with soldiers who underestimated her before. "I don't care about honor," she said, her voice cold. "I care about winning." With that, she moved quickly, her reflexes honed from years of combat. She disarmed the Rhinar warrior in seconds, using his own momentum against him. He fell to the ground, stunned but unarmed. The room fell silent. The other Rhinar warriors stared at her, surprised at how quickly she had defeated their best fighter. The tall warrior stood up, brushing himself off. "You are skilled," he admitted, his voice begrudging. "But skill alone does not win wars." Sarah smiled. "It's not just skill. It's knowing when to use it." The tension in the room didn't completely vanish, but there was a shift. The Rhinar warriors, though still proud, began to respect her. They saw that the humans were more than just weapons. They were smart, fast, and unpredictable. They fought differently, and that was exactly what the Rhinar needed. Meanwhile, Damian was working with Vixelia's generals. The Rhinar were disciplined, but their strategies were too predictable. Damian knew they needed to think outside the box. He taught them how to use smaller units to strike fast and hit the enemy where they weren't expecting it. He explained how the humans used deception and misdirection to outmaneuver their opponents, how they would create diversions, and then hit hard at the right moment. Vixelia watched from the sidelines, her sharp eyes taking in everything. "You think your methods will work with us?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Damian turned to face her. "We don't have time for pride, Your Majesty. We need to win. You have the strength, and we have the strategy. Together, we can turn this around." For a moment, Vexelia's gaze softened, though only slightly. "We shall see, human." As the days passed, the alliance between the Rhinar and the humans began to solidify. The humans had their own way of war, but the Rhinar warriors slowly began to understand the value of these methods. They learned from each other, and despite the tension, there was a growing sense of unity. Damian couldn't help but notice that something had changed in Vixelia. The proud queen, who had once seen humans as nothing more than a necessary evil, was starting to rely on them. She was learning to trust them, and that trust was beginning to form the foundation of something much larger than just a temporary alliance. The humans and the Rhinar were no longer just allies in name. They were learning to fight together, and together they would face the enemy. The real battle, the one that would decide the fate of the Rhinar Empire and the galaxy itself, was still to come. The day the first battle was to take place had finally arrived. The Rhinar and humans stood side by side, preparing for an assault that would decide the fate of the Empire. Damian Harris and his team, along with their Rhinar allies, gathered on the battlefield's edge, looking out over the vast, broken land. The sky above was a dull gray with dark clouds swirling ominously. The air was thick with tension. Vixelia stood at the front, her silver armor glinting under the dark sky. She had never looked more determined, yet there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had put her trust in the humans, and now they would see if they could truly turn the tide of the war. Damien stood beside her, his hands resting on the tactical data pad in his arms. The mission was simple: strike the enemy's main supply line, disrupt their forces, and create chaos. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about taking the first step to cripple the invaders' advantage. "We strike fast, and we strike hard," Damien said, his voice steady. He looked at the Rhinar soldiers lined up alongside his team. No hesitation, no second chances. Sarah stood a little off to the side, adjusting her weapons. She had seen enough battles to know that the first engagement often set the tone for the rest. The Rhinar were strong, but this was a different kind of fight. She could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty that came with facing an enemy as determined as the invaders. But what kept her grounded was the trust she had in her team. Together, they could do anything. The signal came. The ground shook as the Rhinar war machines rumbled to life, and the human forces moved into formation, ready for battle. The alliance was about to be tested for the first time on the battlefield. Damien gave the order, and the entire force moved out. The sound of boots marching in unison filled the air, a powerful sound that seemed to vibrate through the earth. The Rhinar warriors, with their heavy armor and weapons, advanced with the humans close behind. They were a striking sight, a mix of alien strength and human agility. As they approached the enemy lines, the first shots rang out. The invaders, hidden behind barricades, fired from a distance, their weapons crackling in the air. The humans quickly returned fire, using cover and their advanced tactics to outmaneuver the enemy. The Rhinar warriors, with their raw power, charged forward, cutting through the enemy lines with relentless force. Damien's team worked in tandem with the Rhinar, their tactics blending perfectly. Sarah, with her keen eye, moved swiftly, picking off enemies with precise shots. She had never felt more alive. This was the fight she had been waiting for, the moment where everything she had learned in battle would come together. But the invaders weren't backing down. They fought with a fury that matched the humans and the Rhinars, and soon the battlefield was a chaotic mess of explosions, gunfire, and the clash of steel. Damien called out commands, directing his team and the Rhinar warriors as they fought side by side. They were pushing the invaders back, but the battle was far from won. Vixelia's voice cut through the chaos. "Keep pushing. We can break their lines." Damien nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The Rhinar were beginning to falter in some places, their lines starting to weaken under the invaders' pressure. But the humans, using their speed and precision, were closing the gaps, creating openings for the Rhinar to exploit. It was a dance, two very different forces moving in sync, each playing to their strengths. The battle raged on, but there was no sign of slowing. Every minute counted, every move a test of the fragile alliance. Damien's heart pounded in his chest. They couldn't afford to lose this battle. It wasn't just about the Rhinar Empire. It was about showing the galaxy that humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors, capable of standing beside the greatest fighters in the universe. With a final push, the enemy lines began to break. The invaders were retreating, their forces scattered and disorganized. The Rhinar had been dealt a heavy blow, but with the help of the humans, they had fought back. Damien watched as the invaders fled. The battle wasn't over, but this first victory was a crucial step forward. He looked at Vixelia, who nodded in approval. There was no doubt in her eyes now. The humans had proven their worth. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The victory from the previous battle had given the Rhinar and humans a moment of hope, but peace was short-lived. The war raged on, And with each passing day, the tension between the two forces grew. The humans had proven their worth, but not all Raynar had accepted them as true allies. There were whispers in the shadows, rumors of betrayal and distrust among the Raynar ranks. Captain Damian Harris and his team were in a briefing room, discussing their next move. The Raynar had gained ground, but the invaders were regrouping, preparing for another assault. The stakes had never been higher. "We need to be ready," Damian said, his voice sharp. "If we let our guard down, we'll lose everything we fought for." Sarah stood by the window, looking out at the war-torn city. The skies were dark, the air thick with smoke. It was a constant reminder of what was at risk. "The Raynar are on edge," she said, her voice low. "Not all of them are happy with this alliance." Damian sighed. He knew Sarah was right. There were factions within the Raynar Empire that didn't trust the humans, and some would rather see the Empire fall than rely on outsiders. He had heard the rumors too. Whispers about traitors in the ranks, secret meetings in the dead of night. "We can't afford any internal divisions," Damian said. "We need to stay united, especially now." Just as the conversation was starting to settle, the doors to the briefing room slammed open. A Raynar officer, her armor scratched and blood-stained, rushed inside. Her eyes were wide with panic. "Captain Harris," she gasped. "You need to come quickly. There's been a betrayal." Damian's heart sank. "What are you talking about?" "The Queen's court," the officer said, her voice trembling. "There are traitors among us. They've been working with the invaders. They've sabotaged our plans. And now they're trying to frame the humans." Damian's mind raced. This was worse than he had feared. If the Raynar believed the humans were behind the sabotage, everything they had worked for would crumble. The fragile alliance would break apart, and the war would be lost. "Where is Vixalia?" Damian asked, his voice urgent. "She's been taken," the officer said, her eyes filled with fear. "By her own people." Without a moment's hesitation, Damian turned to Sarah and the rest of the team. "We need to find the Queen before it's too late." The group quickly mobilized, heading toward the palace's inner chambers where Vixalia was being held. As they moved through the hallways, they could hear the faint sounds of chaos echoing in the distance. The palace was on high alert, the traitors making their move. Damian's heart raced as they reached the throne room. There, standing in front of the massive doors, were a handful of Raynar guards. They were tense, their eyes darting nervously as Damian and his team approached. "You can't go in," one of the guards warned. "The Queen is under." Damian didn't wait to hear more. With a swift motion, he signaled to Sarah, who moved quickly to disarm the guards. The humans and Raynar worked together in perfect synchronization, taking down the small group of traitors without a single shot fired. As the doors to the throne room swung open, the sight inside made Damian's blood run cold. Vixalia was kneeling, surrounded by her most trusted generals, the very ones who had sworn allegiance to her. They had turned on her, and now they stood with weapons drawn, ready to end everything. The Queen lifted her head, her eyes filled with anger and betrayal. "Damian," she whispered. "I knew it was too good to be true." Damian stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're here, Vixalia. We'll get you out of this." But Vixalia shook her head. "It's not just about me. They've already taken the palace. The invaders are inside, and they're about to launch their final attack. We need to act fast, before it's too late." The traitors had done their worst, but the humans and the loyal Raynar soldiers still had a chance to turn the tide. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. Vixalia's trust in the humans had been shaken, but Damian knew they had one last shot to save everything. If they didn't act quickly, all hope would be lost. The betrayal that had rocked the Raynar Empire now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the urgency of the situation. Damian and his team, along with the loyal Raynar forces, stood side by side as they prepared for the final assault. The palace, once a symbol of power and authority, now felt like a battlefield, darkened, tense and uncertain. Vixelia's anger still burned in her eyes, but there was a new understanding between her and the humans. The treachery from her own people had made her realize that survival wasn't just about strength or pride. It was about trust. The humans, despite everything, had proven their loyalty. "Are you ready, Queen?" Damien asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of what was at stake. Vixelia looked at him, her expression serious. "We have no choice. The invaders will be upon us soon, and if we don't act now, it will all be over. But this time we fight together." Damien nodded. It was clear now that the Reiner and humans had formed something stronger than just an alliance. They had become partners, a united front that could stand against the invaders no matter what. The final battle would be fought in the heart of the palace, where the invaders had broken through. The humans and Reiner warriors would need to work together to take back the throne room and reclaim control of the capital. There was no room for hesitation. It would be all or nothing. Sarah walked up to Damien, her face set in determination. "I've got the entrance covered," she said, her voice firm. "The rest of you focus on the throne room. I'll make sure no one gets in or out without us knowing." Damien gave her a quick nod. "Be careful, Sarah. We need you back." "I'll be fine," she said with a smirk, already heading off to her position. The rest of the team moved into position, taking up positions near the throne room's entrance, weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension. Every step, every breath felt heavier than the last. The Reiner warriors were lined up behind them, eyes full of resolve. Damien turned to Vixelia. "This is it. No more tricks. This time, we finish it." Vixelia's gaze was unwavering. "I will not let my empire fall. Not to traitors, not to invaders. We fight as one, or we fall together." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder. The invaders were closing in. Damien could feel the battle building up around them, the calm before the storm. This was the moment they had trained for, the moment when everything would be decided. Then, without warning, the doors to the throne room burst open. The invaders, led by their general, rushed forward, guns blazing. The Reiner soldiers and humans reacted instantly, a coordinated force of strength and precision. Damien and his team moved with practiced speed, covering each other, working together to take down the enemy soldiers. The invaders had no idea what they were up against. The humans' tactics, combined with the raw power of the Reiner, made them an unstoppable force. Every strike, every movement, was calculated and precise. It was a beautiful blend of human ingenuity and Reiner strength. Vixelia was at the front, her blade cutting through the invaders with deadly precision. The queen fought with the same determination that had earned her the title of ruler, but now there was something more: unity. She was fighting not just for herself, but for the people she had learned to trust. The battle raged on, the invaders retreating further into the palace, but the humans and Reiner pushed forward, never letting up. As the last of the enemy forces were driven out, a deep silence fell over the room. Damien stood beside Vixelia, breathing heavily, but with a sense of pride. They had done it. The palace was theirs once again. Vixelia turned to him, her eyes filled with something new: respect, maybe even gratitude. "You were right, Damien. Together, we are stronger." Damien gave her a small smile. "You didn't have to learn it the hard way." Vixelia's lips curved into a slight smile as well. "I suppose we all did." The Reiner had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Yet, in that moment, there was a new sense of hope. The humans and Reiner had fought together and emerged victorious. They had proven that despite their differences, they could stand side by side, united in their fight for survival. Damien looked at the team, then back at the Reiner warriors. This was only the beginning. Together, they would face whatever the invaders threw at them next. The palace was silent now, the dust of battle settling on the cold stone floors. The Reiner had won the fight for the capital, but the war was far from over. The invaders had retreated, but they had not given up. Their forces were still out there, regrouping, preparing for their final strike. It was clear that the next battle would be the most important one of all. Damien stood in the war room, staring at the holographic map that displayed the enemy's movements. The invaders' fleet was massive, but their numbers were not what worried him. It was their desperation. They had already lost ground on the planet's surface, and now they were preparing for a final push. If they succeeded, they would crush everything, not just the Rhinar Empire, but all the systems allied with it. This was it, the last chance to stop them. Vixelia walked into the room, her expression grave. She had seen the cost of the war firsthand, but now her eyes held something different. Resolve. "What's the plan, Captain Harris?" she asked. "We strike them before they can launch their final assault," Damien replied, his voice steady. "We've learned enough from them. We know where their weak points are. If we can hit their fleet hard enough, we can break their momentum." Vixelia nodded. "We can't afford to wait any longer. We have to act now." Damien turned to his team, who were gathered around the map. Sarah, always ready for action, was already checking her weapons, preparing for the battle ahead. "We'll need to move quickly. They won't expect us to launch an attack this soon. We strike fast, hit their weak points, and disrupt their command." The team exchanged glances. The plan was risky, but it was their only option. If they didn't take action now, they might never get another chance. As the team prepared to move out, Damien could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another mission. This was the turning point in the war, the moment that would determine the fate of the galaxy. He looked at Vixelia, who stood by his side. They had come a long way since the beginning of this alliance, and now they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice firm as she checked her equipment one last time. Damien nodded. "Let's go." The team, along with a squad of elite Rhinar warriors, boarded their ships and made their way toward the invaders' fleet. The ships cut through the vastness of space, their engines humming steadily as they neared the enemy's position. Tension was thick in the air, but there was also a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for freedom, for the future of the galaxy. As they approached the enemy fleet, the first wave of invader ships came into view. They were massive, built for destruction, but the humans and Rhinar knew exactly what they were up against. With precision, they launched their attack, striking the enemy's weak points with overwhelming force. Explosions filled the space as the invaders fought back with everything they had, but it was too late. The humans and Rhinar had worked together, exploiting the invaders' vulnerabilities, and now their fleet was crumbling. Damien's heart raced as the battle unfolded. The sound of weapons, the glow of energy blasts, and the chaos of space warfare filled the cockpit. They were making progress, but they couldn't let up. The invaders were ruthless, and they would keep fighting to the bitter end. The final battle raged on, but the humans and Rhinar pushed forward, determined to see it through. Slowly but surely, the invaders' fleet began to fall apart. One ship after another was destroyed, their forces scattering into chaos. Finally, the enemy fleet was broken. The Rhinar and humans had done it. They had won. Damien stood in the command center of their ship, looking out at the remnants of the invaders' fleet. There was no celebration. Not yet. The victory was hard-earned, and there was still much to do. But for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of relief. Vixelia stood beside him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "We've done it," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "We've won." Damien nodded, but his eyes were focused on the stars ahead. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Together, humans and Rhinar had stood against impossible odds, and now they would rebuild. This victory was only the first step toward a future where they would fight for each other, not just as allies, but as friends. The final battle was over. The enemy fleet had been shattered, and the Rhinar Empire was no longer on the brink of collapse. The invaders had been driven back, their power broken. There was no denying it. The humans and Rainer had won. But the true victory lay not in the destruction of their enemies, but in what came after. The aftermath of the war was a time of rebuilding. The Rainer homeworld, scared by years of conflict, needed mending. The cities that had once been magnificent were now in ruins. The loss of life was immense, and the Rainer knew it would take time to heal. But they were no longer alone. With the help of their human allies, they would rebuild stronger than before. Captain Damien Harris stood in the palace's grand hall, looking out over the city. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape. It was hard to imagine how much had changed in such a short time. From the darkness of war to this moment of hope, it seemed almost impossible. Beside him stood Vixalia, her regal armor now a symbol of victory, but her eyes showed the weariness of a queen who had fought not just for her empire, but for her people's future. She had seen the Rainer Empire almost crumble, and now, with the help of the humans, she had led them to victory. "Thank you, Damien," Vixalia said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "You didn't just save my empire. You saved my people. We would never have made it without you." Damien turned to her, offering the small smile. "It wasn't just me, Vixalia. It was all of us. The humans and the Rainer. We fought together." She nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes, together. For the first time, we weren't just allies. We were united." The truth of her words settled between them. The war had not just been about defeating a common enemy. It had been about bridging the gap between two very different species. The humans and the Rainer had fought side by side, each learning from the other, each growing stronger together. What started as an uneasy alliance had turned into something much deeper, a bond built on respect, trust, and shared goals. Sarah Cortez, standing nearby, approached Damien and Vixalia. "The fleet's been reassembled. We're ready to help secure the outer systems," she said. "We've been offered a seat in the Rainer Council. They want the humans to be a permanent part of their future." Damien turned to Vixalia. "Is this the beginning of something new?" Vixalia looked out over the city, her eyes softening. "Yes, this is the beginning of a new era. We'll rebuild not just our empire, but our relationships with others. The humans have shown us what we've been missing: compassion, unity, and the power of standing together." Damien felt a sense of pride swell within him. He had always believed in the power of unity, but seeing it realized here, with the Rainer and humans side by side, was something he would never forget. The Rainer would never be the same again, and neither would the humans. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they could face it together. In the distance, the first signs of rebuilding had already begun. Workers were clearing debris, and new structures were being erected where the old ones had fallen. It was a long road ahead, but the hope was undeniable. Vixalia turned to Damien once more. "We've learned much from you, Captain. The Rainer will be stronger, and I hope this alliance will last for generations." Damien smiled. "It will, Your Majesty. It will. Together, we'll face whatever comes next." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final light over the world, Damien couldn't help but feel that this moment was the start of something bigger. The war was over, but the future was just beginning. And with allies like the Rainer by their side, the humans knew they were ready to face anything the galaxy might throw at them.